Hello and welcome to None of the Above. My name is Steve Nemirovsky and I'll be your host. This is actually our first episode of None of the Above, and it seems like the place to start is giving you some background as to why we're here and hopefully what you can take away from the program and the reason you'll want to join us on a regular basis. Unfortunately, the impetus for this show revolves around two words that are part of our daily political milieu these days. One is dysfunction and one is polarization. I've spent a good deal of my career in and around government, and I think most people will agree with me that this is one of the roughest periods we've ever seen in terms of dysfunction and polarization. And if anything else, things are just getting worse and worse as time goes on. So one of the purposes of this show is to deal with these two topics, dysfunction and polarization, see if we can provide some insight into how we got here, and most importantly, try and provide some insight into where we're going. I think when you talk about dysfunction, you could talk about it at many levels. And one of the things that's interesting to me is dysfunction is kind of important to the political system. You want a certain amount of raucous behavior and arguing about issues, but at the end of the day, you want solutions. And today, dysfunction seems to be pervasive, not only in politics, but in government. When I think of dysfunction, the elements that I think are most disruptive right now is, first of all, the fact that we seem to have a total lack of trust. Politics is a system that has to work on trust. It has to work on handshakes. It has to work on my word is my bond. And I think somewhere along the way, we seem to have lost that. It's a critical foundation of the system. Another element of dysfunction that I think really is upsetting to most people is the fact that we just don't seem to have civility anymore. A friend of mine was mentioning in a book he's reading dealing with Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill. He said it's an excellent book, talking about the fact that you had two people who really didn't agree on many things, yet they found a way to work together, to the civility, compromise, words that we just don't see nowadays on a regular basis or hear nowadays on a regular basis. And finally, I think most people would agree we seem to have a leadership vacuum. I'm not trying to blame this on any one person or any one party or anything, but in order to have solutions and in order to avoid dysfunction, you have to have leadership. Leadership can come from a lot of different places, but right now we seem to have a particular leadership vacuum that is driving a lot of what we're facing. In terms of polarization, similar to dysfunction in politics, I think we will always have polarization in politics. We have a two-party system, and the Democrats and Republicans don't agree on issues. But at the heart of it all is the ability to compromise. One party can start way to the left, way to the liberal side of the spectrum. The other party can start way to the right, to the conservative side of the spectrum. But at the end of the day, you've got to have an ability to find compromise. I'm from Chicago originally, and one of my favorite quotes is from the first Mayor Daley, Richard J. And he said that good government is good politics. I think, unfortunately, we have turned that paradigm upside down, and we're now living in a world where people seem to think that good politics is good government, and I think good politics is not good government, and we somehow have to find a way to reverse that. Another quote that is one of my favorites when we're talking about polarization, and again, I'm going to attribute this to something I read where President Reagan had this on his desk, and I'll read it, is, "It's amazing what you can accomplish if you do not care who gets the credit." Fairly simple statement. I think a lot of us like to lead our lives by that statement, but our political world doesn't work that way these days. If anything, we live in a political world where blame is the centerpiece, and as things go wrong, as the level of dysfunction is heightened, if anything, we live in a world where it's about blame, it's not about results, it's not about sharing credit and moving forward. So dysfunction and polarization are kind of the central themes of what we're talking about here. And the question becomes, why this show? What are we going to do that's different from other political shows? Well, I think when you look at other political shows today, you find that they're very substance-based. They're very issue-based. We're going to have a segment today on immigration reform. A lot of back and forth on who's right on immigration reform, who's wrong, who's right on the budget, who's right on the debt ceiling, who's right on same-sex marriage, etc. Very substance-based, very issue-based. And also within the same context, I think some of the television programming has become very hostile too, and they're laying off the blame left and right. So none of the above, we're going to try and focus a little more on process. We're not going to take sides on issues. Quite frankly, we don't care what the results are in the issues, but in the world of politics, our goal is to help drive compromise and drive solutions. So we're going to talk about process a lot more, and we're going to talk about solutions. We want this to be a solution-based program, and we want to give you, the listeners, ideas for how to present solutions. In fact, I think if there was a motto for this show, it's going to be the old phrase, if you are not part of the solution, you are part of the problem. And in fact, unfortunately, many of us are part of the problem. We don't vote. And we're going to have a few segments on this show on why Americans don't vote and why it's so important that Americans start to vote. And in fact, the fact that we haven't voted as a population in quite a while, and statistically what I'm talking about is at the turn of the century, not the turn of the last century or millennium, but the turn of the 19th century, turnouts in elections would run 90–95%. Everyone who could vote was voting. We're in a place now where, particularly in an off-cycle election, we're lucky to get 50% turnout of the electorate. So our turnout isn't good. We don't vote. We're not active. We are not politically active. Politics is not at the top, it seems, of many people's radar. I mean, we complain about politics a lot, but that old adage like the weather, we talk about it a lot, we complain about it a lot, we don't do a lot about it. And finally, I think it's led to mediocrity. We are living with mediocrity in our political system. We're living with mediocrity in our government. And I think we've got to reverse that. We cannot afford to have our system be degenerated to the point where there's dysfunction and this polarization, that the byproduct of all that is mediocrity. So again, if you are not part of the solution, you are part of the problem. And on None of the Above, we are going to try and give you these solutions so that everyone can join in, get active, be participating on a regular basis, so that maybe we'll wake up relatively soon and dysfunction and polarization will not be the watchwords of our conversation. As I mentioned earlier, one of the things we're going to focus on None of the Above is finding solutions. There's plenty of problems, but there's very few solutions. And one of the solutions that we're going to address, hopefully many times in many different ways and coming from different angles, is the importance of being politically active. And in this case, today we're going to talk about the importance of citizen lobbyists. A lot of people sit back in their comfy couches and they watch the issues and they yell at the TV, but they don't engage. And there's plenty of issues certainly to engage on, one of which we're going to talk about today is the immigration issue. And our guest today is Warren Klug. He is, well, I like saying this about people, someone who needs no introduction. But certainly Warren comes from one of the most iconic families in all of Aspen. And Warren, if you're like me, you go through life being introduced as Chris's dad, yes. Hillary's dad, Jim's dad, Kathy's husband, right? But in his own right, Warren is a very prominent around town and probably best known for his role as the general manager of the Aspen Square Condominium Hotel. And you can't miss it because it's one of the best locations in town. So I don't know if you found the location, but someone did a great job there. But for today, it's a different hat you're wearing. Today you're wearing a hat as the chairman emeritus of the Aspen Chamber Resort Association. Mm-hmm. Is that correct? I always want to say Chamber of Commerce. Do we have a Chamber of Commerce in Aspen?
The Resort Association is it.
It is the Chamber
yes.
of Commerce, all right.
And really, we are the only business-oriented organization, only business advocacy organization in town that's formalized. We, as the Chamber and Resort Association, we do function in terms of normal Chamber of Commerce activities, but a whole lot more too, because as a resort community, we're concerned with marketing and sales and service to our customers and helping them enjoy a great experience here. The Chamber gets involved in helping or sponsoring even special events like Winter School coming up in January, 4th of July. Chamber plays a big role in the Food and Wine event in June. So it's a Chamber of Commerce, but a whole lot more than that.
And we're going to talk about lobbying today. A lot of Chamber of Commerces tie into the United States Chamber of Commerce for lobbying. Do you tie into them for political issues or lobbying? Well,
we have in the past, okay. But in fact at this point, and a decision made a couple of years ago when I was the chairman of the board of the Chamber, we withdrew from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. While many of our interests would coincide with the U.S. Chamber, particularly in the area of climate control and the environmental issues that are important to Aspen, we found that we were very much in different directions. Some of you may remember the commercials that were on television over the past years, showing a family freezing in their living room, and the headline sponsored by the U.S. Chamber, something about, you know, if we don't leave the coal producers alone, this is where we're going to be. I mean, things that, positions taken by the Chamber that were just absolutely in opposition to what we feel to be important in Aspen. So actually we resigned, and the world did not come to an end. The U.S. Chamber did not fold. Our $900 a year dues did not put them under. But we felt it was important to take a stand. So on immigration, I will say, which of course is our issue today, our interests do coincide, and we've been in there shoulder to shoulder with the U.S. Chamber as well.
So before the immigration issue came on the screen, had you done lobbying before, either personally or as an association in conjunction with the Chamber, or outside the Chamber, or was this your first foray into
We've done some things and made our opinions known through the Chamber, and particularly, for example, in the area I mentioned of the environment and concerns with what's going on in that arena. But I would say the immigration issue has been one that encouraged much more involvement on the part of the Chamber and its members than anything I can think of in recent years. Now, locally, we're very much involved in efforts that I'm not sure I would call lobbying as much as I would just say making sure that the business community interests are heard, whether it's the issue like the Lift 1A hotel project that seemed to be under discussion for years. We certainly made our opinions known. The issue of how do we get more lodging in the community, which is a big deal for this town, as we've seen our lodging base continue to shrink over the years. So those kinds of local issues we very much have been involved through our Chamber committees. But on the national stage, I would say I'm hard-pressed to think of where we've been as involved as we are in immigration right now.
Okay, so let's get to immigration. You had kind of a notion of lobbying, and you had a presence more municipal-based, but all of a sudden there's a national issue. So how does this national issue surface within your organization, and then how do you decide to go about stepping up and getting involved?
Well, the first thing I think is to recognize that there are good reasons for us as individuals, as a Chamber organization, those of us in business, there are good reasons to be concerned with the immigration issue. One issue simply is that we have 11 million undocumented people in this country working, and they're working because they're important to their employers. And you have to think that in a state like Colorado, an awful lot of those 11 million people are living and working right here, even in our own community, but certainly throughout the state. I would say my concern and my interest in getting involved in the immigration issue is twofold. Number one, I'm a person who cares about people. I'm a person of faith, and the Lord that I worship says you got to care about everybody, not just the people who look and talk like you, but everybody. And so that's a big issue to me. And clearly we're dealing with 11 million people who are in a tough spot. How do we deal with them positively? That's one issue. And then the other issue, which I think is extremely important for us, right down here to the local level, as well as a national issue, is it a business issue? We need the employees that we need. And you just look around in a community like Aspen, other mountain resorts, agriculture throughout the state, who's doing the hard work that needs to be done, whether it's housekeepers or kitchen crews or agriculture workers. An awful lot of them do not speak English, or English is their second language. These are immigrants who've come here to work. They're employed because, on the one hand, they want to work, and on the other hand, employers need them. And so I see those two issues, or those two reasons to be involved in the immigration issue. We care about people and treating them in an appropriate, humane way. At the same time, this is very much a business issue. Business needs the people they need.
So you mentioned about a personal attachment to the issue, but now I don't know where you were at the time when the issue first came out with the association. You have an association you have to deal with. You have committees, as you said, you have a board. So how does this issue start to percolate within the association? And by the way, when did it start to percolate? And then how does it move through the organization?
I would say within the Chamber it was an issue 2 to 3 years ago, and several of us who were on the Chamber board at that time brought it up and said, listen, we need to be advocates for immigration reform. Nobody has all the answers. There are still lots of proposals and ideas floating around. We can talk about that too. But we recognize this especially as a business issue, and as the only business advocacy organization in Aspen, it was appropriate for the chamber to look into the issue and to take a stand. And in fact, a couple of years ago, I believe was the first time we passed a resolution, the chamber board, saying this is important, and we call upon our elected officials in Washington, D.C. to address it in positive ways, to look at the different avenues that can be taken to solve these problems. We didn't say, here's the answer, say yes or no, but what we did say is, gee, there are answers out there, we need to make sure they're addressed. And so beyond that, we passed a couple of resolutions. I, in fact, had an opportunity to visit Washington, D.C. a couple of times about 2 years ago, and present our concerns, not only to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, by the way, and enlist their help, but also with our elected leaders, senators and congressmen in Washington. And I've had a chance since a couple of years ago to visit several times back in D.C. and again let our opinions be known.
So let's take a step back. So you bring this issue, or someone brings the issue to the association, and now you've passed a resolution and you're going to move ahead.
Right.
How did you design your lobbying effort? How did you appoint someone, and perhaps it was you, to be the head of the effort? How did you define your issues that you were going to approach? And then what were your initial steps in deciding who to reach out to and how to get that done?
Well, I sort of ended up being kind of the de facto leader of the crowd, so to speak, but there were others too, especially others in the lodging business here in town who jumped right in, because these are our employees we're talking about, people who are working for us, that we want to make sure are treated fairly and can continue to work for us, of course. So I kind of got the ball rolling with different organizations back east and an opportunity to lobby. My first foray into that was perhaps, I guess, about 3 years ago with the American Hotel Lodging Association. They have an annual April fly-in event where they have people from hotels all over the country come in and meet with their elected leaders with a specific 1, 2, or 3 point agenda and present our concerns and our issues. And that was my first lobbying opportunity, kind of orchestrated by someone else, but I was there to do it. And it was an eye-opener. One eye-opening fact is it seems like our federal government's run by 24-year-olds, and you've seen that yourself, I know. Everybody in Congress, all the employees and aides and everybody else, look like they're about 16, but they're really 24. And that was kind of fun to see. But you also realize that there are all kinds of people with different issues pounding on our elected leaders and meeting with them, and their issue is really important. And how an elected leader in the Senate or the House can sort through all that, I'm not sure, but it's a real challenge. How does our issue get to rise to the top on their priority list, where they really will pay attention, really will listen to people, and consider the right kind of direction? That's a real challenge, it seems to me.
And by the way, that's a very important point. In fact, the first time I was lobbying in Washington, I'm a lobbyist in my day job, I worked on a piece of legislation that took about 2 years. And let's say over those 2 years I lobbied 100 hours. I probably sat and spoke with the congressman or the senator who I was working with for a total of 7 minutes.
Yes.
And then 99 hours and 53 minutes was working with the staff. So
Yes.
I don't know if a lot of people understand what a staff-driven model this is. And again, I'm not trying to say it's an imperfect model. It's just that, as you said, the reality is that time is valuable for these elected officials, and most of the time you are dealing with staff.
That's correct. Also, their time is not their own. You know, all of a sudden they expected to meet with you, spend a few minutes, but then a vote is called and they got to be gone.
Exactly.
And so you're right. In my own experience, and I've been back to D.C., I don't know, maybe 8 times on this issue over the past 2 or 3 years. And absolutely, most of the time you are not meeting with the elected official, you're meeting with their staff people. And that's just the way it is. But you do have to think that your messages get presented, perhaps not with the greatest of urgency or the importance that we would put on them, but they do get presented to the elected leaders, and that's how the system works.
So how did you decide to start? So you have your resolution, you're out of Washington to meet with the hotel people, et cetera, and you're reaching out to your congressman. Who was the congressman at the time? Was it Tipton or?
It was Scott Tipton.
Well,
yes.
Scott Tipton. So have you written a letter? Have you called ahead for a meeting? How have you engaged his office on this issue?
Well, I have written a number of letters to him.
I mean, at this time.
Sure. Yeah. At that time, I had written and had called his office. I had talked to some of his people. He's got a satellite office in Steamboat and then down in Pueblo as well, and Grand Junction also. And I've had a chance to talk to some of his staff people. But I would say my first foray into the D.C. arena It was all set up by the Hotel Association.
Okay.
And then I learned how to do it, and then we got into that.
And I think that's important because a lot of people
is.
feel as though there's a congressman out there somewhere, but they don't know how to approach them or write the letter. And but in your experience was you went through a conduit because you felt there was
my first time.
The first
That's
time you went
correct.
through that.
And that was very helpful, and you learn how to do it. And in fact, as part of that program, before we had our Capitol Hill meetings, the Hotel Association had a whole program about lobbying, how to do it, what works, what you don't want to do, and that sort of thing. And that was how. And one of the things they mentioned is don't be offended if you're not really meeting with your congressman. It's instead you're meeting with an aide who we hope keeps notes and passes them on.
So you're out to Washington, you have these meetings, you come back, and what's next then? Where do you decide to go, and how do you keep this lobbying thing moving?
Well, I felt it was important to continue to follow up by email and by letters to our congressman. As it happens, on the immigration issue, our own Michael Bennet, our own senator here in Colorado, played a major role in writing the legislation that came out of the Senate. And his staff people were very, very much involved in all of that. And I've developed some friendships and good contacts with them, and it's been very helpful.
So you reached out to Congressman Tipton, and you reached out to Senator Bennet, and those are your primary focuses in terms of lobbying?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And you're working with staff?
Yes. And I will say, though, that the last time I was there, for example, we had an opportunity to meet with Michael Kaufman, who is in the Denver area, congressman, and also Cory Gardner, who is outside of Denver, in the eastern end of the state, and then as well as our own Scott Tipton here. And I've had an opportunity to meet and talk with Congressman Tipton several times here in our own community. I attended a town hall meeting last summer that he did over in Leadville, and in fact, just a couple weeks ago, we had a business roundtable event right here in Aspen where we had 8 or 9 different business people here in our community join with Scott Tipton and talk about strictly the immigration issue. It was a very interesting meeting, very helpful, and it was gratifying to see all these different people with different business interests sitting around the table with basically the same message. It's time to do something. There are solutions out there. Let's not let this whole thing die and get nowhere.
Now, who has called this last meeting you talked about? Has the congressman organized it, or is a coalition group come together?
It was through the chamber. ACRA sponsored it, and we had
ACRA?
Aspen Chamber Resort Association sponsored it, and
I'm a little slow on the uptake here.
No problem. And working with Scott Tipton's office and also Frida Wallison, the local Republican chairperson, who's a great help in helping us make contact
Navigate.
And set up arrangements.
Right. Well, I think you're going about this the right way. One of the things that I've learned about lobbying is, and it's one of my wife's expression, if you can't go in the front door, you have to go in the back door. If you can't go in the back door, you got to kind of climb through the window. And it's up to you as the person seeking access. You've got to find the way to get the access.
Right. And I think one of the things that's important is to say we're not out here to demand anything. And when I read articles in the immigration issue, for example, about people demanding outcomes, I think that is such an unfortunate approach, and I think not particularly helpful. I think rather the approach is, listen, we all know there's a problem here. And by the way, on immigration, everybody knows it. Everybody says the system's broken, we got to do better. But in fact, if we do nothing, which is kind of where we are right now, at a standstill, then we're continuing a system that doesn't work, that everybody acknowledges is not good, but it's still in place. So an issue like immigration is one where there are ideas and there are proposals out there, and you have to think that the majority of people in Scott Tipton's, for example, Scott Tipton's district, which is almost half of the state of Colorado, all the western slope areas, it's an important issue to the people in his district. 6 major ski areas are located in the 3rd district, and all kinds of agriculture. Agriculture interests are here, and you go down to Grand Junction, who's picking the peaches? Who's taking care of the grapes and the vines, and apples over in Hotchkiss, and who's doing all the work? Scott Tipton's district includes a whole lot of people for whom English is not their first language.
So my experience is, particularly in today's dysfunctional world of politics, to get something done, you have to create pressure. The congressmen and the senators, they've got to feel pressure. Now on immigration, quite frankly, this has been going on for 15 or 20 years. We've talked about immigration reform. We haven't gotten there.
Yes.
In the last general election, I think there was a sense coming out of that the Hispanic vote was being recognized as a very critical vote.
Yes.
And that was going to create some pressure.
Yes.
And it probably did manifest itself in a bill coming out of the U.S. Senate. And I do want to talk about that in a minute. But before we get to that, what do you feel you're doing, if at all successfully, locally, to keep pressure on? How are you building pressure with the congressman to make him feel that he's got to get something done? How are you doing that?
I'm not sure that I would use the word pressure, but I would say
My
I'd like
word.
to.
Okay.
Fair enough. I would like to encourage him and make known to him that this is an important business issue. And when we met with him a couple of weeks ago, I made this comment. I said, you know, as a registered Republican, I look at this whole issue and say the Republicans are the wrong side, because in addition to the concern with the individuals involved, this is hugely a business issue, and businesses need the people that they need. And I think as the party of business, supposedly, that the Republicans need to be out front advocating for appropriate immigration reform. And this is not a giveaway, this is not amnesty, this is recognizing the facts on the ground. What are we going to do with those 11 million people? And how can we make sure they can stay here, work legally? How can we make sure that the businesses that want to employ them can have legal employees? We want to follow the law, and we want our employees to be legal. That's our goal. That's the goal of every business. At the same time, we need the people that we need. So it's a real challenge in that regard.
So as I mentioned earlier, my word pressure, there seems to have been some pressure on the U.S. Senate, and they did pass a bill in June, I think. And of course, you know, Civics 101 says the same bill that passes the Senate has to pass the House. And if the same bills don't match up, they have to have a conference to come up with a new bill. But the House right now does not seem it wants to go down the path that the Senate has taken. So,
well, they won't even vote on it. They won't even, you know, the Speaker Boehner won't even allow a vote, because if there is a vote, there's a chance that it would pass, or at least enough of it would be addressed that they'd end up in a conference committee and something would come out of it. So far, while Speaker Boehner says it's not off the table, we're still going to talk about it, there's still a chance for immigration reform, but if a vote is not allowed, it's going to die on the vine, and that would be a tragedy in my mind.
So let's talk about the Speaker. Obviously, Speaker Boehner runs the House. Nothing's being voted on without his say.
Right.
I'm going to come back to my pressure word. Now, obviously, ACRA, is that what you call yourselves? ACRA sitting here in Little Aspen isn't going to put pressure on the Boehner unless he gets on one of the chair lifts and we turn off the electricity and we don't let him off the chair until he moves the bill, right?
Well, that's one strategy.
That's one strategy, right. So having said that, how are you working with the coalition or anyone to maybe build some pressure there? Are you going back to the Hotel Association? Yes. Where are you? What are you doing to build that lobbying effort and that pressure?
The Hotel Association continues to be an important lobby interest in this issue, because so many hotel and hospitality industry employees are affected by what comes out of the legislation. In addition, I think that there needs to be a groundswell of businesses, like the businesses in Aspen and others, who say not only to our own local congressmen and to our statewide people, but I think on the federal level, something has to be done, because we need the employees that we need. And when you read stories, and these happen in Colorado as well as other states, you read stories of a guy, a farmer in Fort Collins, whose vegetable crop, he can only pick half of it because the rest of it, he doesn't have the employees, he can't get the people. He's trying to do things legally, can't get the employees, half his crops are rotting in the field. It happened to and there was a big story last year about a corn farmer in Olathe, right here on the western slope, who tried to hire local people, tried to do it right, and ended up, he could not harvest all of his crop. I talked to a lady who was involved in the peach orchard business in Grand Junction. This is, you know, hour and a half, 2 hours away from us. And talking about a farmer that could not harvest his peaches with legal help, and he had no choices.
Now, one of the topics we're going to work on again on None of the Above is how to use this amazing tool called the internet to get people engaged in government, to lobby, etc. Do you have a Facebook page? Do you tweet? What do you do, if anything, to communicate and again, build this coalition you need?
Well, you know, I haven't gotten involved in that, and although I do send my share of
I highly recommend it then.
Well, then I would appreciate the input on that. Sure. One of my concerns, though, is that a congressman gets so much communication that way that how does any of it rise to the top? And that's just a question I would ask you, because I mean, how many emails and tweets and so forth do you think these guys get? I think they get mountains of it. And how does any of it really end up making an impression and making a difference?
Well, I don't know the answer to that, but I do know if you don't try and you don't create this volume
Right.
and you don't create
Right.
this pressure, then you won't get what you want.
Well, that's a good point.
So I think it's going back to getting in the front door and the side door and the window. You have to keep all these avenues open. And if your group and the groups you're working with, your coalition, has not yet investigated how to maximize the internet, I think that's probably your next step here.
That probably is something that we should take a good hard look at, no question.
Warren, this is terrific.
It's been my pleasure,
You are
Stephen.
my
Thank you.
first guest, my
Oh,
best
wow.
guest ever. This would be the best interview ever on None of the Above. Well, I certainly hope you enjoyed that interview with Warren Klug. If anything, again, no matter what side of the issue you're on, you can feel the passion that Warren is bringing to the issue. And I'll suggest to you that when you get involved in government, whether it's at your school board level or talking to your congressman, the passion will always come across. And it's the passion that sells. The passion is, it's like a product. And you're selling what you believe in, you're selling your passion. And I think Warren speaks so eloquently for his issue, but it's his passion, I think, that drives it. One of the things that I wanted to drill down a bit inside, not this particular issue, but any issue, and it does impact on the immigration issue, is kind of some inside baseball, some inside lobbying, some inside baseball. And as I said at the beginning of the show, we're going to talk about process. There's a few topics that we're going to dwell on throughout the course of None of the Above, but I want to give you some highlights tonight, and then I want to overlay how they impact the stuff that Warren's talking about and his coalitions in trying to pass immigration reform. So what I think what we'll do here is I'm going to invoke my inner Lou Dobbs, and we're going to go to the blackboard, or the whiteboard rather. We've got 5 topics up here that we're going to talk about. First one is bait and switch. This is a common topic that you talk about when you go to buy a car, bait and switch, or some product at a store. But to me, bait and switch is a common political gambit that gets played by our legislature, by our elected officials, which could be happening right now with immigration reform. As you'll notice during our interview, we talked about the fact that the U.S. Senate has in fact passed a piece of legislation to deal with immigration reform. Again, I don't have an opinion on the merits of the bill, but it has passed. We're now in the House of Representatives. We talked about the fact that maybe Speaker Boehner will or won't let this particular issue come to a vote. What happens a lot of time with legislation is one chamber, in this case the Senate, will pass a piece of legislation, and then the other chamber will pass a piece of legislation, but they won't match up. And at the end of the day, you find that nothing happens. Yet when the election cycle occurs, your senator comes home and says, well, I voted for immigration reform, and I'm a champion of this issue. Your congressman or your state rep, whatever the issue is, may come home and say, I voted for that, I was a champion for that. Well, the answer is nothing got done. Nothing got done because the 2 houses didn't agree, they couldn't come together. This is something that, we'll talk about more in the show, but I think you may see, or again, if you want to have immigration reform passed, you hope it doesn't occur, you may be seeing play out in the context of immigration reform. Stalling for time, obviously, our Congress is great at stalling for time. Most people think this is the classic do-nothing Congress, but there's reasons that they stall for time, and I think it's important to understand that some of those reasons. One of the reasons is just because there are election cycles, and they want to make sure that their votes are timed to intersect with a particular election cycle. Maybe they want to align a vote to a primary, they want to align a vote to the general election. Another part of stalling for time is stalling for money. This is the second element here. Now the Senate will pick on immigration reform already. They've already passed immigration reform, and there's U.S. senators that have already voted on this. They, of course, want to raise money for their elections. They've made their vote. They're going to have a hard time going back to constituents and saying, I need to raise some money, help me out. Sure, I voted for your issue, what can you do? The real pressure on raising money and the real stall that comes involved in raising money is the longer you drag this out, the more you can go back to constituents and say, hey, this is a tough issue, I can be with you, but I've got a tough election come up, and if you want me to be with you, so to speak, we've got to tie the vote and the money, not in an illegal or legal sense, but you know, it's out there and we can't avoid it. So stalling for time, stalling for money. Another thing we talked about with Warren is where's the pressure. And you could have issue pressure and you can have election pressure. Now issue pressure is kind of rare when you think in terms of immigration reform. This has been talked about for almost 20 years now. There has never been enough issue pressure. The immigration reform has never bubbled to the top of the list. It's never been the it issue. It's never been what has to happen in a particular Congress for almost the last 20 years. An example of issue pressure, of course, was when our economy was falling apart and Congress passed TARP. They didn't pass TARP, maybe we would have ended up in a depression, who knows. But there was an issue pressure, there was a catastrophe upon us. That had to be solved. Immigration reform doesn't rise to that level. And in fact, many issues these days are not rising to that level. So you've got this, this notion of how do you create pressure as an issue, you might not succeed. So the next part of creating pressure is how do you create election pressure? How do you make your congressmen feel that they can't come home without voting for your issue? And we talked to Warren about this some, and I don't know if Warren feels that he is creating that pressure that's necessary. He's making a great case. His group is making a great case. They've got some good issues that they're talking about, but they're not sensing that they're creating that pressure where their Congressman Scott Tipton, in this case, feels he can't come home without that vote. Now, in Congressman Tipton's case, and we're going to talk about this on some other programs, he has some election pressure that is this relatively new phenomenon because within Republican caucus, there is more primary election pressure these days, or just as much primary election pressure as there is general election pressure. So timing ties out in terms of where's the pressure, and if you're going to put election pressure on, in other words, you won't get reelected if you don't make the right vote here. There's the primary season, and then there's the general season. The last issue I want to talk about, and again, just briefly today, and hopefully you'll join us, so we're going to drill down in a great deal on all these issues, is the composition of the legislature, and I really should have put legislature and executive here. There's a few different combinations that are possible, not that many actually. One is the executive branch and the legislative branch can be all one party. Now, when President Obama was first elected, the entire legislature of the Congress, the Senate, and the House of Representatives, it was entirely Democratic, and when you hear a conversation about the Affordable Care Act, you hear part of those conversations noting the fact that it was only voted on by Democrats. Nothing, I'm not saying it's good, I'm not saying it's bad, but that's one formulary. At the same time, you'll note that when the Democrats did control the executive and the legislature, they didn't pass immigration reform. Similarly, I believe when President George Bush was in office, there was a short period of time when there was complete Republican control. I don't exactly know what they did or didn't accomplish during that period, but it was a relatively short period of time. Another mix that is obviously available is the executive branch could be one party and the legislature could be another party. So when you have that set up, the legislature might get together and pass what they think is important legislation, meaningful legislation, but then they're facing the veto that comes with the executive branch. The third combination, which is of course what we're facing now, is when the executive branch is the same as one House of Congress, in this case the President and the Senate, and then the other house is the second party. So here the Democrats control the presidency and the Senate, and the Republicans control the House. In that case, you have the Republicans being the stopgap for their party on every issue. And since they're the stopgap, there's a lot more pressure and a lot more stalling, a lot more bait and switch, a lot more possibility for failing to build pressure, all these other issues we talked about. And I think some of that's what's going on right now with immigration reform, that the Senate being controlled by the Democrats has already passed it. They've announced that the president will sign it. And now the ball moves over to the remaining House, and it moves over to the Republicans. So these are some of the dynamics of the system. And again, I said we're going to talk about process. These are some of the dynamics of process that you have to understand if you're going to drill down and understand politics in America. And that's, again, one of the things that we will cover on None of the Above. Our next guest is Bailey Ludlam. Bailey is the editor of Ballotpedia. I would suggest to you that in your travels around the internet, particularly your daily travels, if you only have one spot or one time to get on the internet and focus on the political world, the place you want to be is Ballotpedia. Bailey, welcome. How are you today?
Thank you. I'm doing pretty well. How are you?
Good. You're the editor of Ballotpedia,
Yes.
which means you
Yeah.
know everything about Ballotpedia, correct?
Yes,
Isn't
I
it-
know the ins and outs. I've seen it grow over the years.
How long have you been with Ballotpedia?
I've been with Ballotpedia since 2009, and I actually started as a staff writer writing about ballot measures on the site.
And now you're the editor. What does it mean to be the editor of Ballotpedia?
Oh, well, it certainly, it means launching new areas of coverage, looking for new ideas, and just new opportunities for us to expand and cover politics and elections in the United States.
Well, I already told the viewers that this is an amazing site. One of the things I like about the site is when you go there, it says an interactive almanac of U.S. politics. I love that word almanac. What does it mean for Ballotpedia to be an interactive almanac?
Yeah, I absolutely love that about the site. So the platform that we use is a wiki platform. A lot of people are familiar with Wikipedia. It's pretty similar to that in the sense that readers can sign up on the site and they can start adding content immediately. It's very easy. You register, you get your username, and you can start adding content anywhere on the website. We do have some volunteer projects. And we certainly do look at all of the edits and contributions made, and we try to connect with our writers and talk about new ideas as well as just editing and style. As far as the almanac portion goes, it's another feature of the wiki in that we can add content and cover issues at any point throughout the year whenever anything comes up. So we might have a profile that we've started about the laws governing ballot measures, for example, and an event might occur that changes that, and so we can go back in and adjust it. It essentially helps us really aggregate a lot of information and turns into some really interesting reports. We're able to spot trends throughout the years.
Now, I know the site was the brainchild of Leslie Graves. I've had the pleasure of meeting Leslie. She's an amazing lady. What can you tell us about how it all got started and what was the initial impetus for having a site that would educate the population of the United States on everything political?
So it started off from, I mentioned ballot measures, and that's actually where the name Ballotpedia came from, the ballot measures on the ballot. And the whole concept there was that we noticed that ballot measures were not being covered very well across the media. The ones that you hear about are the notable ones, the social ones, those hot topic issues such as legalizing marijuana across, in various different states. And so we wanted to create a location where readers could come and find out about all of the measures that appear on the ballot so that when they go to vote, they aren't surprised about what's appearing there and they know exactly what's going on. That includes, we started diving into who the support and opposition are, what are the polls, how much money is going into these campaigns, and in some cases, that's millions of dollars. So we found a whole just breadth of knowledge that we wanted to share with everybody and put it on one site, just a one-stop shop. And that ended up transforming into doing the same coverage and more for all levels of government, federal, state, and local.
Yeah, one of the things I think is really good about your site is most political sites are slanted in one direction, conservative, liberal, whichever. But yours attempts to maintain a neutrality. How do you achieve that neutrality? How do you make sure you're always presenting the facts, in a neutral, unbiased way?
It's a very important part of what we do. We are constantly, whenever we write a piece, if there's any questions or doubts or anything like that, we generally have a number of other writers or editors take a look at it, double check it for any bias at all. But our main focus is to make sure that we are being balanced or bringing both sides of the table to our readers. Right there in one place. So we also make sure that when we're looking for information, our sources are varied across different types of websites, different types of media outlets, things like that. But also our public, or the readers, can flag pages. They can flag pages on the wiki and let us know if they think that something's biased, or send us an email, and we'll take a look at it. We'll ask for outside input in order to make it as balanced as possible.
Does that happen very often? Do you, in fact, get input from people and then make changes?
We do get a number of emails. I think this year we got upwards of 600 emails from readers asking for either additional links or more information. Some we've received candidate bios. They submit their profiles to us, and we fact check everything before we put it on the wiki.
So as you mentioned, it originally started around ballot initiatives, and now you've grown. So maybe could you explain a bit all the different stops along your site that someone can go to and the different types of information you're providing today?
Oh, certainly. So on the front page of the website, you'll see different little buttons on the center of the site. You'll see a section for elections themselves, which essentially the main focus of that is to aggregate all of the election information that we're providing on the website in one place, broken out by state. So that's a pretty useful place to go before the November elections. After that, we have Congress, which is your place to go for congressional information. Because of all of the activity this year with Congress, we've also started covering the federal issues, such as government or presidential appointments and other issues such as the government shutdown. We're covering those as well. Then we also dive into your state executive offices. So that includes governor, lieutenant governor, attorney general, secretary of state, those typical ones, but also we dive down into the public commissioners. So we look at the agencies and the different departments, and that includes coverage of not only the offices, but also the officials in office and the elections associated with them.
And then with each election, you're also posting who the different candidates are and all the parties that are represented?
Yes. As soon as a filing deadline happens, we collect the list of candidates, and we've put up profiles for every single candidate that's running for office. We follow them all the way through the election. So if there are any that drop off, whether they missed a deadline, they didn't get enough campaign funds, whatever it is, we keep a really, really close eye on that to make sure that the website is as up to date as possible, and we will make a note of that on the profiles.
So are you seeing a lot of traffic on your site as you get close to elections of people wanting to get educated on candidates and issues?
Yes, definitely. There is often the way that the traffic goes is that there's a big spike in October. In the maybe 2 weeks prior to the election, there's a lot of people rushing to find out about what's going to appear on their ballot, who's running, what kind of issues are there. We also see spikes throughout the year for the primaries. They're much smaller, but they're there. Yeah.
So what are some of your next projects? Where are you taking your site in terms of new ideas and new concepts?
Well, it's actually a very exciting time for us at Ballotpedia. Mostly we had a lot of coverage in terms of federal, state, and state level items. One area that we're diving into more so is the local government. And so this year we launched a new project. It's a school board elections project, which covers the top 1,000 school districts by population. And so we have profiles on all of those districts. We're covering all of those elections every year, and we're keeping track of that. So that joins our local ballot measure coverage in terms of that area. But also, I mentioned earlier that we started covering federal issues in our Congress project. So that's another area that we're trying to provide better coverage for our readers and just stay on top of.
Well, I know Tip O'Neill used to say all politics is local. So I think the fact that you're drilling down to these Board of Education elections is very important. And I know for a lot of people that run for office, it's pretty much their training ground. They get started at the local Board of Election, and then they work their way up through the political system.
Yeah, definitely. That's actually something that we're looking at is because of the nature of the wiki and because we are able to just look at all these candidate lists and even just follow officials' career history, we're able to see them jump from position to position and kind of follow that their growth and their just careers over time.
So when you go on the site, and again, there's a little video of Leslie Graves. She's talking about the site. She says there's 507,000 elected officials in the United States. That's a staggering figure. Do you cover all of them or most of them?
Most of them. We're aiming to get to that point. Our goal of success is to cover all 500,000 or so. I think there might be a little bit more than that on the website, and cover the candidates, the incumbents, and the elections themselves.
So how do you measure success? When you get to the end of a year, how do you know if Ballotpedia's had a good year?
We know from if our goal at Ballotpedia is to provide information prior to the elections. We want to have profiles of all of these candidates and incumbents ready to go by the time that voters are headed to the ballot box, and even earlier than that. And that's, for the primaries, not just the general election. Also, if we are able to cover, so for example, any ballot measures that come up, we want to be able to tell you the ins and outs, essentially give you the scorecard of what's going on with that ballot measure. Another one of our goals, which is it's a long-term goal, is to be able to build a database where you're able to see trends over time, which provides you more context for the current elections.
And I know you're becoming an important resource for the press. I know Wall Street Journal, New York Times, a lot of the more important press sources are reaching out to you for data and information.
Yes, we've gotten a number of requests for information. It's sometimes just, finding out how much money has been contributed to a ballot measure campaign, or just getting an update on a particular issue that's going on. But also, we've been doing much more analysis because of the wealth of information that we're able to add onto the wiki and keep their archive. So that's been pretty useful for them.
So Bailey, in our remaining time, what I'd like you to do is, can you maybe explain in your own words, if I'm a brand new user, I haven't been on Ballotpedia before, how do we find you? Once we get there, what's the best way to experience Ballotpedia? And particularly, how do we then move to that next level, at the wiki level, where we start communicating with you and helping you improve your product?
Oh, sure. So what you want to do is you want to go to www.ballotpedia.org. There are a number of avenues that you can take once you're there. The ones that I suggest are to head to, once you're on the front page, you'll see a big map of the United States. Click on your state, and it will take you to a portal where you'll see everything that we have about that particular state. So we'll show you Congress, state executives, state legislatures, ballot measures associated with that state. And there are links in there not just for the current information, so a current election, but there's also some other links to the laws to run for office, the laws related to ballot measures. So that's probably the best place to start. And I definitely recommend, just clicking around and jumping from place to place. All of our pages have links that are kind of like breadcrumbs that take you to another piece of the puzzle. Another method that you can also take if you're more focused on just one particular area of government is from our front page, click on one of the side buttons for that particular area of government. So it might be state legislatures or Congress. You can also navigate the website through that way. As far as participating in the wiki, we're definitely looking for volunteers. If you're interested in volunteering to add it, you can email us at editor@ballotpedia.org. If you're just interested in sharing an idea, that's fine too, and we definitely welcome that. We try to respond within 24 hours, and that's that same address, editor@ballotpedia.org. And of course, if you're just interested in kind of keeping track of what's going on with the website or what is coming up in terms of political news, what just happened this week. We send out weekly email newsletters, and you can sign up by either visiting lucyburns.org or emailing us at editor@ballotpedia.org, and we'll get you signed up right away.
Well, Bailey, I have to tell you, you are a great ambassador for Ballotpedia. I've enjoyed the chance to chat with you today. And as I mentioned before, if you have any interest in politics, this is the one place you need to go to start your investigation. It may lead you in other directions, but checking Ballotpedia on some type of regular basis, particularly, as Bailey said, when we get close to the elections, this is going to be the best source that I'm aware of to keep you informed about the world of politics. Thanks again, Bailey.
Thank you.
Well, I certainly hope you enjoyed that conversation with Bailey. I'm sure I didn't hide my enthusiasm for Ballotpedia. It's an amazing site, particularly if you're a political junkie, and maybe by the time we're done with a few episodes of None of the Above, we'll get you all turned into political junkies. But it's a great place to go. And in fact, one of the things you probably won't like about this show is I'm going to give you a homework assignment after each show. And today's homework assignment is I want you to find a political site, a comprehensive political site that you can go to and check on a regular basis and get educated. I, of course, would recommend Ballotpedia. So between now and the next show, go to Ballotpedia, go to another site, cruise around, get educated a little, learn who your state representative is, learn a little bit about the political system, and then we're going to start moving along the line here and get you educated, get you active. So thank you very much for joining us. It's been a pleasure to host this first show. I hope you'll join us for the rest of our programming. And in addition to the programming, if you want to stay in touch, we're going to set up a site at info@noneoftheabove.us. And remember the .us because it's fairly unfamiliar. So info@noneoftheabove.us, you can communicate with us. Similarly, and I actually don't know when this first show is going to run, we're setting up a website called Third Party 101. So if you try to get to Third Party 101 and you don't find us, it means that be patient a little bit and the website will be up. And finally, I'm an old-fashioned guy. I live in the Snowmass area. If you want to pick up the phone and give me a call, pick up the phone and give me a call. I love to talk politics. Love to talk about the show. Love to get your ideas on how to make the show better. So in closing, and we're going to close this way every week, I just want to remind everyone once again, I know it's monotonous, but if you are not part of the solution, you are part of the problem. Thank you.